Hey, welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather, and I've been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009 with my show, making it the original Tudor History Podcast. This channel is where I put all of my episodes from all of my shows, as well as lots of extra content like this video right here. Today, we are talking about the time when women got together to negotiate peace for all of Europe, because that was a thing that happened at one point. It was called the Ladies' Peace. And it feels a little bit out of place in the 16th century, which was a world dominated by kings and popes and emperors. But that, my friends, is what makes the Ladies' Peace so remarkable. So that's what we're going to talk about. Before we do that, though, if you would like to see more Tudor history and 16th century history in your YouTube feed, why don't you go ahead and hit subscribe so you never miss one of these videos. All right, so in 1529, Margaret of Austria and Louise of Savoy, two women of extraordinary intellect and determination, stepped into the diplomatic spotlight. They weren't just supporting players in the drama of European politics this time. Oh no, they were the ones calling the shots. They negotiated a treaty that momentarily paused the wars tearing apart Europe, showing the world that women could indeed handle power and diplomacy with a finesse often denied to them in the history books. Today, we are going to dive into the story of the Ladies' Peace and talk about the political chaos that brought these two women to the table, their motivations, and how they achieved what seemed impossible: peace, however fleeting, through diplomacy and grit. To understand why the Ladies' Peace was so groundbreaking, we need to first set the stage. The late 1520s were a time of near constant upheaval in Europe. Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, had just destroyed the French at the Battle of Pavia in 1525. Francis I of France was captured and dragged to Spain as a prisoner of war. Humiliated, he was forced to sign the Treaty of Madrid, a deal so unfair that it might have been written in Charles's favor alone. France lost huge amounts of land, including territories in Italy, Flanders, and parts of northern France. Unsurprisingly, France had no intention of ever sticking to the treaty. The moment he was back in France, he renounced the agreement, plunging Europe back into war and chaos. Meanwhile, Henry VIII of England, ever the opportunist, decided that Charles was becoming too powerful. Aligning with France was another calculated move, and not even the protests of his Spanish wife, Catherine of Aragon, could dissuade him. Of course, Henry had his own problems at the time, namely trying to divorce his wife Catherine, so her opinions likely held very little weight. As if this wasn't enough, Charles's mercenaries sacked Rome in 1527. I did a whole episode on the sack of Rome, capturing the Pope and further destabilizing the region. Then France retaliates by invading parts of Italy. With the threat of the Ottoman Empire looming in the background, Christendom is in a very precarious state. Someone needed to step in and broker some peace before the entire continent collapsed under its own chaos. Enter the women. Right? Sometimes you just need to get stuff done. You bring in a woman. Enter Margaret of Austria and Louise of Savoy, two women who understood power and diplomacy better than most men of their time. Margaret was no stranger to negotiations. As the aunt of Charles V and a seasoned regent for the Netherlands, I've done a whole episode on her too. She had spent years managing complex political situations. She was pragmatic, fiercely intelligent, and had a reputation for getting it done. Louise of Savoy, on the other hand, was motivated by something far more personal: her son. As the mother of Francis I, she wanted to ensure his release from Spain and secure his position on the European stage. She also had a keen political mind and had acted as regent for France during her son's captivity, proving her ability to lead in his absence. Margaret proposed the idea of the women brokering peace in a letter to Henry VIII in January 1529. She argued that the kings involved were too proud to make the first move towards reconciliation, but women, well, they could step in without appearing too weak. In her words, how easy for ladies to concur in some endeavors for warding off the general ruin of Christendom. This wasn't just clever, this was a stroke of genius. By letting the women take the lead, the men could save face, and if the negotiations failed, the women could easily take the blame. Louise, too, saw the potential in this approach. She expressed her desire for peace, writing to Margaret's envoy, "We must necessarily contend and argue, but I sincerely hope it will be without anger or ill will." These women weren't just acting as proxies for their male relatives. They were asserting their own vision for Europe's future. So, July 1529, Margaret of Austria and Louise of Savoy met in the city of Cambrai, now in modern day France. The stakes could not have been higher. Europe was watching as these two women undertook a task normally reserved for kings, diplomats, and generals. The logistical challenges alone were immense. Margaret faced warnings of possible threats against her safety, and with advisors urging her to travel with a large armed consort. Her response? Pure Margaret. If any of her counselors and courtiers were afraid, they could just go home. She refused to bring an armed entourage, reasoning that even the smallest display of force might make her mission appear hostile. This was a work of peace, not war. Louise of Savoy was accompanied by her daughter and a small retinue, also approached the negotiations with a practical resolve. Cambrai itself became a hub of activity with strict rules to maintain order. No one was allowed to carry arms, and a curfew was put in place to prevent any disruptions. The women were intent on setting the tone for diplomacy, not conflict. The talks were intense. For 3 weeks, Margaret and Louise negotiated terms that would reshape the fragile peace in Europe. Letters from their male counterparts poured in, often attempting to steer the direction of the discussions, but it was clear that Margaret and Louise were the ones in control. Their persistence took a toll, and both women showed signs of stress as the weeks dragged on. Yet they remained resolute, and by August 1st, their efforts bore fruit. Margaret and Louise attended Vespers together, a symbolic gesture of unity. A few days later, on August 5th, they celebrated the successful conclusion of the peace talks with a public mass in the cathedral. The sermon, aptly titled "Blessed are the Peacemakers," showed the significance of their achievement. For a brief moment, the wars that had ravaged Europe were silenced. The treaty that emerged from Cambrai was undeniably favorable to Charles. Francis had to make significant concessions, including agreeing to a substantial ransom for his release and relinquishing claims to the territories in Italy. Many suspected Margaret, as Charles's aunt, had skillfully navigated these negotiations to benefit her nephew. Louise, though, had succeeded in securing her son's freedom and preserving France's sovereignty, albeit at a cost. The peace, though fleeting, was a remarkable accomplishment. It proved that women could handle high-stakes diplomacy just as effectively, if not more so, than their male counterparts. The Mass in the cathedral was a public celebration of their achievement, also marked the beginning of the fragile truce. Within less than a year, though, tensions would flare once more, and Europe would return to its usual state of turmoil. While the ladies' peace didn't last, its impact showed the ability of women to step into these roles traditionally denied to them. Margaret of Austria and Louise of Savoy showed not only their diplomatic acumen, but also their courage and their resolve in a male-dominated world. They proved that peace could be achieved through dialogue, compromise, and empathy, qualities often overlooked in the power struggles of the 16th century. So, for a brief moment in history, these women brought Europe together, and their legacy continues to inspire. So there we go, my friend, a little bit about the ladies' peace of 1529. If you made it to the end of this video and you enjoyed it, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. It helps to beat that algorithm and get our content to even more people. And I sure hope I earned your subscription to my channel, where I put out videos like this all the time. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to keep binging content like this, here's that episode on Margaret of Austria that you might enjoy. Here's a video that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for being here. Remember, you are deeply loved. I'm so glad I share the planet with you. I'll be back soon, and don't forget to drink your water. Bye-bye.